"Don't drop the tray, Elijah," he muttered under his breath, balancing a silver platter of champagne flutes while weaving through a sea of glittering gowns and designer tuxedos. The ballroom of the Marlowe Hotel gleamed like something out of a dream, crystal chandeliers, violinists tucked into the corners, a silent auction table lined with trips to the Maldives and diamond earrings. Elijah Hargrove didn't belong here. He knew that. He was only here because he needed the extra $100 to cover his 3-year-old son's daycare payment on Monday. "I shouldn't even be here," he mumbled again, wiping his palm on his black slacks before lifting a glass for a passing guest. "Excuse me." "Did you say something?" Elijah looked up, nearly dropping the tray. The woman standing in front of him looked like she'd stepped right out of a high-end magazine. Sleek black dress, subtle diamonds framing her collarbone, and a presence that made the air shift. Not flashy, just powerful. Her dark brown hair was twisted up, her eyes sharp and curious. "I said nothing. Champagne," he offered, holding out a glass. She took one, but her eyes didn't leave his face. "You don't look like the usual hotel staff," Elijah blinked. "Is that a compliment or an insult?" Her lips curved into a smile. "Depends, what's your story?" "I'm just serving drinks," he said quickly, adjusting the tray. "For tonight, that's all." She tilted her head. He turned to go, but her voice stopped him. "Wait." "What's your name?" "Elijah, Elijah." She repeated like she was tasting the name. "I'm Delilah." She didn't give a last name, but he recognized it. Delilah Rowan, CEO of Rowan Imports. Featured on the cover of Business Monthly for being one of the youngest female executives to take a family company global. And she was here, at this auction for pediatric cancer research, looking at him like she didn't care that his black tie was rented and his shoes were one scuff away from falling apart. "Nice to meet you," he said, and walked away before he said something stupid. He spent the rest of the night trying not to look for her, but every time he turned around, she was close by, talking to donors, laughing with board members, elegant, composed, and completely out of his universe. After the last tray was cleared, he stepped into the back hallway to grab his coat. He was just reaching for his phone, checking the time to make sure Natalie, his babysitter, hadn't called when someone rounded the corner. "Delilah," he straightened. "Miss Rowan, hey, you left before I could ask you something," she said calmly, arms crossed. "I was just finishing up." "Got an early morning with my kid," he stopped himself. Why was he even saying that? "You're a dad." "Yeah, Nalan, he's 3, which is why I needed this shift." He gave a small, awkward laugh. "You probably meet a lot of people pretending to be something they're not in places like this. I'm not one of them. I'm a guy trying to keep his head above water." She looked at him for a long moment, then stepped closer. "Are you free tomorrow night?" He blinked. "What? I want to have dinner. With you." Elijah stared at her like she'd just asked him to fly a plane. "You want to why?" She smiled, and this time it softened her whole face. "Because you're the most honest person I've met in a long time, and I like that." He hesitated. "I don't have a suit or a car, or I'll handle the details," she said, pulling a small card from her clutch. "Be ready at 8. He stared at the card. "Your driver will pick me up?" he asked dryly. She arched a brow. "Of course. You think I'd let you take the subway to Le Chateau?" He blinked. "Wait, that place with the gold staircase in the front," she winked. "Wear something black." She was gone before he could say another word. The next evening, after a disaster of a wardrobe panic and a near breakdown over tying a real bow tie, Elijah stood on the curb with Nolan's tiny hand in his and a babysitter he'd met through his neighbor at his side. A sleek black car rolled up and the driver stepped out with a polite nod. "Mr. Hargrove," Elijah glanced at the babysitter. "You got him," she smiled. "We'll build blanket forts and watch dinosaur movies. Go, you're allowed one night." He slid into the backseat and tried not to freak out. When he arrived at the restaurant, a valet opened the door and another usher led him past velvet curtains and into a private dining room. And there she was. Delilah stood when he walked in, and for the first time in years, Elijah felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was seen. "You clean up nice," she said, her eyes warm. "I can't feel my neck from this tie," he muttered, tugging it. She laughed. "Here, let me." She stepped close and fixed it with deft fingers. "You're not nervous, are you?" "I'm not used to this," he said honestly, glancing around at the crystal glasses and candlelight. And I'm definitely not used to women like you asking me to dinner. She looked up at him. Maybe you should be. They sat, talked, ate food he couldn't pronounce. She asked about Nalan, about his work, about what he wanted if things were different. He asked about her life in business, how it felt to run a company in a world that didn't always take women seriously. I don't usually date, she admitted, swirling her wine. Not seriously. Too many people chase money or power. I've gotten used to being alone. He leaned forward. You don't have to be. Neither do you. Neither of them breathed for a second. By the time dessert came, Elijah wasn't thinking about bills or rent or how his shoes pinched. He was watching her laugh, feeling something in his chest crack open. When the check came, not that she let him see it, Delilah stood and grabbed her coat. Come on, she said. Where? I want to show you something. Minutes later, they stood on the rooftop of the restaurant, the city lights glowing below them. The wind tugged at her hair, and she turned to him with a look that knocked the air out of his lungs. No one's ever looked at me the way you do, she said quietly. I don't know how not to, he replied, and then she kissed him. It wasn't careful or practiced. It was real, breathless, and full of something neither of them could name yet. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. This isn't just a fling, Elijah, I know. And I don't date for fun, neither do I. He didn't care that she was a CEO or that he was a single dad trying to scrape by. All he knew was that in that moment, with her hand in his and the city beneath them, something had started. Something big. Elijah stood frozen outside the penthouse elevator, the hush of the hallway pressing in around him. The doors had just closed behind Delilah, and he was still catching his breath. He had kissed a woman like her. Not just kissed, been kissed by her. And not out of charity or curiosity, but with purpose, like she meant it. He glanced at the suit jacket draped over his arm, the one she'd insisted he keep after dinner, because you can't go back to your life pretending this night didn't happen. His fingers were still curled faintly around the collar. By the time he got home, Nalan was asleep on the couch beneath a pile of mismatched blankets, his babysitter sipping tea and reading a dog-eared novel. He asked about you once, she whispered. Then conked out during the second dinosaur movie. Elijah left her generous cash for the night, tucked Nalan into bed, and stood in the tiny kitchen staring at the cracked tile backsplash, wondering how on earth someone like Delilah had walked into his life. 3 days passed in a blur. He returned to work at the auto shop during the day and picked up food delivery shifts at night. He hadn't heard from her. Not a call, not a message, nothing. And he hadn't exactly expected her to chase him either. He told himself she probably had 100 meetings and $1 million deals to close, people with tailored suits and private jets. He was a guy with a rusted-out hatchback and a fridge that needed bungee cords to stay shut. But on the fourth morning, as he was tightening lug nuts on a customer's car, a black SUV pulled up at the edge of the lot. He wiped his hands on a rag and squinted. The window lowered. Delilah, she stepped out, heels crunching against gravel, sunglasses perched on her face like armor. She didn't say anything right away, just walked up and stopped a few feet from him. I didn't call, she said finally, because I didn't want to lead with words I didn't know how to use yet. I thought maybe the suit scared you off, he said, tossing the rag behind him. It didn't. She took off her sunglasses. But I don't do casual, Elijah. I don't do half steps, and I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining what I felt that night. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked past her, opened the small door to the break room, and gestured. Let's talk inside. The room was barely big enough for a table and 2 chairs, but it was private. She sat, legs crossed, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. I'm not asking for anything, he said, leaning against the wall. Not money, not favors. I don't want you thinking I'm one of those guys trying to climb his way into a better life. I know you're not, she interrupted. I've got a kid to raise. He doesn't need me distracted by something that's going to crash and burn. Delilah studied him. Then let's not crash, he laughed under his breath. You make it sound easy, it's not, but I'm not here to play safe either. He sat down across from her, their knees almost touching in the tight space. Tell me what you want, Delilah. She didn't flinch. I want to see you again. I want to know who you are outside of this uniform, outside of one night at a fancy restaurant. I want to meet your son. I want something real. He stared at her, heartbeat pounding so loud he could barely hear himself think. "You want to meet Nolan? I don't do halfway, Elijah. If I'm going to be in your life, I'm going to be in all of it." He hesitated. "He's everything to me. I wouldn't expect anything less." They left the garage together, not touching, not speaking, until they reached her SUV. She opened the door, then paused. "I have a conference in Boston tomorrow. 48 hours. I'll be back late Sunday." She looked at him. "Can I see you Monday?" He nodded. That Monday, Delilah stood outside his apartment door, holding a small paper bag with a cartoon dinosaur printed on the front. Nolan peeked out from behind Elijah's leg, clutching a plastic truck in one hand. "Hi," Delilah said softly, crouching down to his level. "I brought you something." He stared at her, then at the bag, then back again. Elijah knelt beside him. "It's okay, buddy. You can take it." Nolan stepped forward slowly, took the bag, and opened it. Inside was a bright green toy dinosaur and a coloring book with markers. "Say thank you," Elijah prompted. "Thank you," Nolan said, eyes wide. "You're welcome," Delilah replied, smiling. Inside, their apartment was small, one-bedroom, a pull-out couch, a kitchen with humming appliances that had seen better decades. But Delilah didn't look uncomfortable. She sat on the floor with Nolan, helping him peel stickers while Elijah made coffee. He watched her from the kitchen, the way she let Nolan explain which dinosaurs were his favorites, the way she leaned in to listen like every word he said mattered. Later, after Nolan was tucked into bed and snoring softly, Elijah stepped onto the fire escape to find Delilah already sitting there, a blanket over her lap, eyes on the city below. "I haven't done that in a long time," she said. "What? Sat on a rickety fire escape?" "No, just..." Slowed down. He sat beside her, their shoulders brushing. "You looked like you'd done it 100 times. I've spent my life trying to prove I earned everything I have," she said quietly. "That I wasn't just the daughter of a name or a company, that I could fight for it, build it. Run it." He looked at her. "You have. But I've never had anyone who saw me without any of that. I see you," she turned to him, "and I see you. You're not just some guy making ends meet. You're a father who shows up, a man who doesn't pretend. That's rare." He reached out, took her hand. "I'm scared of messing this up," he said. "So am I. But I think I'd regret not trying more than I'd regret failing." Her fingers tightened around his. "Good," she whispered. They sat in silence as the wind rustled overhead, the city humming below, and for the first time in years, Elijah didn't feel like he was barely surviving. He felt like he was starting something worth fighting for. The buzz of conversation in the conference hall echoed off the marble floors, but Elijah could barely hear it over the thud of his heartbeat. He adjusted the stiff collar of the dress shirt Delilah's assistant had dropped off that morning, along with a navy jacket in his exact size. She hadn't even asked, just sent it with a handwritten note tucked into the pocket. "You can't shadow me at a networking summit in mechanics overalls. Meet me at 11. Now here he was, standing beside her in one of the most intimidating rooms he'd ever stepped into. Executives huddled in small circles, laughing over espresso and jargon he didn't understand. The name tags alone read like a fortune list. Elijah felt like a tourist in a foreign country, except everyone else had been born here and handed the map. Delilah leaned toward him, her voice low. "You're holding that coffee like it's a grenade. I'm trying to figure out if I'm supposed to drink it or just swirl it and look thoughtful." "You're doing fine," she said, then nodded toward a silver-haired man in a double-breasted suit. "That's Marcus Vale. He controls nearly half of East Coast logistics. If he mentions golf, don't lie. Just say you've only played once and it ended with a broken club and a duck incident. So, be myself." "Exactly." He gave her a sideways glance. "This is your world, not mine." Delilah's expression shifted. "It's not about the world, Elijah. It's about whether you belong beside me in it, and you do." Before he could reply, Marcus approached and extended a hand. Delilah introduced them and Elijah braced himself, but something strange happened. As he answered a few light questions about his experience running a garage and managing tight budgets, Marcus actually looked interested. He even asked Elijah how he would handle a supply chain bottleneck. If a shipment was delayed something, Elijah had faced plenty of times trying to source affordable parts for older vehicles. By the time Marcus was called away, Elijah stood a little straighter. "You didn't warn me your boyfriend was smarter than the rest of us put together," Marcus said to Delilah before walking off. Elijah turned. "Boyfriend?" Delilah arched a brow. "Problem? That depends. Are you saying it because it's true or because it was convenient?" "I'm saying it because I don't want to pretend you're anything less than important to me." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That evening, after Nolan was picked up from his daycare by Elijah's neighbor and fed a dinner of chicken nuggets and apple slices, Elijah found himself standing in the middle of a gallery opening, surrounded by abstract sculptures and champagne flutes. Delilah had invited him only hours earlier, saying it was a last-minute commitment she couldn't skip and that she didn't want to go alone. "I've never been to anything like this," he whispered, eyeing the sculpture closest to them. It looked like someone had melted a shopping cart and painted it gold. Half the people here don't understand it either. They just nod and pretend. "Good to know I'm not behind. Honestly," she said, turning to him, "I didn't come here for art. I came because I needed to show you something." He frowned. "What?" She hesitated, then stepped closer. These events, these rooms, they're part of my life, but they've never felt like mine until now." "You mean because of me?" "I mean because I'm not pretending anymore, not performing. I'm just here with you." He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "So stop trying to prove you belong, you already do." An hour later, as they stepped out onto the terrace behind the gallery, Elijah pulled his jacket tighter against the breeze. Delilah leaned against the stone railing, her gaze fixed on the skyline. "I've spent years avoiding anything that felt like vulnerability. It seemed like weakness." "It's not," Elijah said. "It's what makes you real." She looked at him, and something in her eyes shifted like a door opening slowly after years of being wedged shut. "I want Nolan to be part of this," she said. "Not just in theory. I want to know what he likes to eat, what makes him laugh, what he's afraid of. I don't want to just be the woman who stops by once in a while with a toy." He stared at her, stunned silent. "I know it's early," she continued, "and I'm not asking for anything from him, but I want to show up in his world, not just bring him into mine." Elijah nodded slowly. "He loves blueberry pancakes, but only if the blueberries are on the side, not mixed in." Delilah laughed softly. "Noted. And he's afraid of the vacuum. We don't use it unless he's out of the house. I guess I'll have to learn some new house rules." He stepped closer. "You're not scared." "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but I'm more scared of not trying." At that, he kissed her. Not because the moment called for it, not because the city lights framed it perfectly, but because he couldn't not. Later that week, Delilah showed up at Elijah's apartment with a second-hand bookshelf and a box of children's books. "I saw it at a consignment store and thought Nolan might like a place for his books," she said, almost shyly. Nolan peeked out from the hallway, then ran to the box, digging through titles with wide eyes. Elijah crouched beside him. "Say thank you." The boy looked up. "Thank you." Delilah knelt beside him. "You're welcome. Want to pick one and read it together?" Nolan nodded and held one out. As Delilah settled onto the floor with him, Elijah stood in the doorway, watching a scene he never thought he'd see a woman like her, in their cramped apartment, reading a story about dragons to his son with all the voices and gestures of someone who'd done it 100 times. And for the first time, he let himself believe this wasn't temporary. That maybe, just maybe, Delilah wasn't stepping into his world to visit, she was here to stay. But just as he leaned against the doorframe, heart full and steady, his phone vibrated, unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Elijah Hargrove," came a clipped voice. "Yes. This is Evelyn York. I'm Delilah Rowan's corporate attorney. We need to talk privately." He froze. "Why?" "Because if you don't walk away from her, I promise you'll lose everything." Elijah stepped outside, the wind biting harder than it had earlier. The call still echoed in his ears, the voice cold, clinical, and full of threat. He paced along the sidewalk in front of his building, the cracked pavement beneath his sneakers grounding him more than he wanted to admit. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe a warning to be careful. Maybe a polite, legal nudge to stay out of the spotlight. But not a direct order from Delilah's own legal counsel to walk away. The door behind him creaked open, and his neighbor, Mrs. Holcomb, stepped out onto her porch, arms wrapped in a faded shawl. "You okay out here?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. He nodded, though it was a lie. Just needed air. She squinted at him for a moment. You get a call, he turned, startled. Yeah, how'd you know? You've got the look of a man who just got told he doesn't belong somewhere. I've seen that look before, in my brother, in my son, and now in you. He swallowed, throat dry. They threatened me, said I'd lose everything if I stayed with Delilah. Mrs. Holcomb shook her head slowly. And do you believe that? He looked up at the apartment window where a soft glow still spilled out. Inside, Delilah was helping Nolan cut out paper stars for a school project. He could see the scissors moving in her hand, Nolan's head bent in concentration, and her other hand gently steadying his. I believe they'll try, he said, but I don't think she'd let them. Then why are you out here instead of in there? Because he was scared. Because somewhere deep inside he still thought he wasn't enough, that he didn't deserve this kind of life, or this kind of love. He didn't answer. The next morning, he waited until Nolan was safe with his sitter before taking the train downtown. He didn't tell Delilah where he was going. He didn't say anything at all. He walked into the Rowan Imports headquarters, a glass and steel tower that rose like a monolith in the heart of the city. The receptionist barely glanced up before waving him toward the elevator. Apparently, his name still meant something at the front desk. When he stepped into the executive floor, it was silent but for the distant hum of a printer. The carpet was so plush it muffled every step. Evelyn York's office door was already open. She didn't look up from her computer. You shouldn't be here. I'm not leaving until I understand what you think gives you the right, Elijah said, his voice low but steady. Evelyn finally looked at him. I'm protecting her from scandal, from distraction. From a man who could cost her more than she realizes. You think I'm a threat to her, I think you're a risk. And Delilah doesn't take risks lightly, not with her company, not with her reputation. She's not a reputation, she's a person. And you don't get to decide who's right for her. You think love is going to protect her when the press finds out she's dating a man with debt, a child, and zero corporate standing. Elijah took a breath. I think if you're truly protecting her, you'd be asking what makes her happy. Not what keeps her clean on paper. Evelyn leaned back. I've watched her build this empire with her bare hands. I've watched her claw respect from rooms filled with men who never thought she'd earn it. She doesn't need a complication. I'm not a complication. I'm her choice. Before Evelyn could reply, a voice cut through the doorway. Then why are you having this conversation without me? Delilah stepped inside, calm and composed, but her eyes were fire. Evelyn stood. Delilah, no, you don't get to speak for me. Not here. Elijah's heart pounded as she turned to him. You should have told me, she said gently. I didn't want to make this worse for you. You think I built everything I have just to let someone else decide who I'm allowed to love? Evelyn cleared her throat. Delilah, I was only you were trying to protect the company, I get it. But don't mistake that for protecting me. Her voice was cool now, professional. You're dismissed. Go home for the day. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded once and left the office without another word. Delilah closed the door behind her and leaned against it. I'm not walking away from you, Elijah said. I don't want you to, but I need to know something. She crossed the room slowly, stopping in front of him. What? If this gets harder, if people start questioning your decisions, if things get ugly, are you still going to choose me? She reached up and took his face in her hands. I've made 1,000 decisions in my life, some brilliant, some reckless, but you, her voice dropped to a whisper. You're the only one that's made me feel like I'm finally living for something more than a bottom line. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I want you beside me, she said. At every meeting, every gallery, every night reading bedtime stories. I don't want a life that's edited for appearances. I want the real thing. He pulled her into his arms, jaw clenched against the emotion rising in his throat. Then you've got me, he said. Every part. 2 weeks later, the gala was held at the same hotel where they had first met. This time, Elijah wasn't in a waiter's uniform. He wore a tailored black suit with cufflinks Delilah had given him the night before, small silver stars that matched the ones Nolan had cut out for his school project. He stood with Delilah beneath a crystal chandelier, his arm around her waist as camera flashes sparked around them. The press didn't ask about his income. They asked how they met. He said the truth. I was just a guy carrying a tray. Delilah added, and I was a woman tired of pretending I didn't need more. There were whispers. There were headlines. But there was also something stronger: respect. Later that night, they returned to the apartment where Nolan was curled up asleep on the couch. Elijah carried him to bed while Delilah put the leftover cupcakes on the counter. When Elijah stepped back into the living room, she was standing in the center of it, barefoot, looking around like she just realized it was home. "Do you know how many nights I've stayed in penthouses without anything close to this?" she asked. He walked to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What's this?" he asked softly. "Peace," she whispered. He kissed her temple. "You sure you want this life?" "With a mechanic and a kid who thinks socks are optional. I want every messy, beautiful part of it." A few weeks later, they stood in a small courthouse downtown. Nolan wore a tiny vest and held Elijah's hand. Delilah wore a simple white dress and no shoes because Nolan had spilled juice on them in the car, and she'd laughed instead of panicked. They said their vows in front of a judge and two witnesses, Mrs. Holcomb and Marcus Vale. Elijah promised to love her without armor. Delilah promised to never let fear make her small again. And as they kissed, Nolan clapped so loud it echoed off the marble walls. Their life didn't become perfect, but it became real. And for Elijah, who'd once believed he'd only ever survive, that was more than enough. It was everything. The morning sun filtered through gauzy curtains as Delilah stirred in bed, her fingers instinctively reaching across the sheets. Elijah's side was empty, but warm. She heard faint laughter from the kitchen, Nolan's high-pitched giggle echoing through the apartment, followed by the low hum of Elijah's voice. She sat up slowly, tucking her knees beneath the linen sheets. Her morning meetings could wait. Nothing mattered more than this moment: the sound of family, the scent of coffee and something slightly burnt, and the knowledge that her life, once built on relentless ambition, now had roots. When she stepped into the kitchen, Nolan was standing on a chair at the counter, proudly pouring a mountain of sprinkles onto a stack of pancakes. Elijah stood beside him, wielding a spatula with mock seriousness. "You said 3 shakes," Elijah said, lifting an eyebrow. "That was at least 20. Sprinkles don't count," Nolan announced. "They're vitamins." Elijah met Delilah's eyes as she leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed but smiling. "You agree with that logic?" he asked. "I do if it gets him to eat something before noon," she replied, walking over and pressing a kiss to the top of Nolan's head. "Morning, chef," Nolan beamed. "We made breakfast for you. Daddy let me flip one." "More like launched one," Elijah muttered, pointing to a sticky patch on the cupboard. Delilah laughed and pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet. The kitchen had changed. Not the layout or the counter space, those were still modest, but the energy. There were drawings taped to the fridge, a new row of mugs on the shelf, and a calendar filled with crayon appointments. Park Day, Library with D, Nolan's show and tell. Later that day, Delilah sat in a small sunlit room inside one of the city's most exclusive private schools. A woman with silver-streaked hair and round glasses adjusted a folder on her desk and smiled politely. "Your son is delightful," the headmistress said, "but as you know, our enrollment process is quite competitive." Delilah nodded. "I'm not asking for exceptions. I'm asking you to consider that a child's potential isn't always reflected in his last name or our income bracket. Nolan is curious, kind, and quick. He doesn't need privilege. He just needs a chance." The headmistress considered her for a long moment, then leaned back. "He's already passed the preliminary assessments, and it's clear he has a strong support system at home. We'll schedule a final observation next week." When Delilah stepped out into the hallway, Elijah was sitting with Nolan on a bench, reading a book about space. Nolan looked up as she approached. "Did they say yes? They're thinking about it," she said, "but I think they see what we do." That evening, Elijah stood in the doorway of what used to be Nolan's corner of the living room. Now it was a real bedroom. Delilah had arranged for it to be built out over the past few weeks, complete with a skylight and shelves lined with books and toys. Nolan lay sprawled on his new bed, fast asleep, a stuffed dinosaur clutched in one arm. "You made this happen," Elijah said quietly. Delilah shook her head. "We made this happen." He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You did more than give him a room. You gave him a place in the world. She turned slowly to face him. I never knew how much I needed this until I found it. He brushed his fingers along her jaw. I spent so long surviving, fighting for every scrap of peace, but with you, it doesn't feel like I'm fighting anymore. It just feels right. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I was going to wait, but I can't. He opened it, his brow knitting as he read the contents, a deed to a small property just outside the city limits with a note attached. You bought a house, we bought a house, she corrected, with a yard and space. And a tree swing Nolan already picked out. He stared at the paper, then at her. You want to leave the city? I want to build something permanent, something that's ours. I'll still run Rowan Imports, but from a place where Nolan can ride a bike without traffic, where you can open your own shop if you want to. No more borrowed space, no more waiting for life to settle. He didn't speak. He just pulled her in and kissed her, slow and full. The following weekend, they visited the property together. It was quiet, with tall trees and a wraparound porch. Nolan ran through the grass barefoot, chasing a butterfly while Elijah and Delilah stood on the porch, their fingers laced. This is where our forever starts, she said. And it's exactly where I want to be, he replied. Over the next few weeks, they packed boxes, signed documents, and slowly moved into the house that smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Elijah took over a small garage in town, and within days, customers were lining up after word spread about the new mechanic who didn't overcharge and always remembered your name. Delilah adjusted her schedule, working remotely most days, only flying to the city for major meetings. Her board initially protested, but when quarterly reports came in stronger than ever, their doubts evaporated. One afternoon, Delilah arrived home to find Nolan in the backyard with a cardboard crown on his head and Elijah on one knee, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Your Majesty, he said to Nolan, may I have your permission to marry your mom again, this time with cake and dancing? Nolan gave a solemn nod. Only if I get to be in charge of music, Delilah laughed, tears already burning her eyes. So we're really doing this. I never wanted anything more, Elijah said. They married under the tree where Nolan had hung his swing, surrounded by neighbors, friends, and the kind of joy that doesn't need chandeliers or gala lights. Nolan served as ring bearer and DJ, playing a chaotic mix of cartoon-themed songs and classic love ballads. Delilah wore a simple dress, barefoot in the grass, and Elijah wore the same cufflinks she'd given him that first night she invited him to dinner. They danced under strings of fairy lights, sharing whispered promises and quiet laughter. Later, as the sun dipped below the trees and guests began to drift away, Elijah led her out to the front porch. Nolan was asleep inside, curled up with a blanket and a dog they'd adopted just 2 weeks earlier. This life, Elijah said, looking out at the horizon, it's not what I thought I'd have. It's better. Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder. We built it together, and we'll keep building it piece by piece. He looked down at her, eyes full. I love you, Delilah Hargrove. And I love you, Elijah. They stood like that for a long time, the night full of crickets and the soft hum of peace, no longer running from the past or afraid of the future. They had found their forever in each other, and it was more than enough.